South Africa has heeded the call then to intervene in Mozambique amid the ongoing political and security instability. Let's start with the intervention through the envoy led by Dr. Mufamadi. Firstly, how has it been received and its impact, particularly during the sensitive time when we are hearing, Sophie, of potential reports of renewed violence come Monday?
Yes, we are told that he was able to speak to the president of Mozambique, Filipe Nyusi, and who indicated to him that there's no need for any intervention because everything is under control and they will be able to manage the situation. But that's a stark contrast to what's happening on the ground when you look at the level of destruction in different regions and cities. You see a situation where there was damage to infrastructure, and particularly including government buildings, and business was not spared either. There's a region, Matola, where the whole industrial park was affected and factories were burnt down, and that clearly would affect supply chain and manufacturing, because industrial park, that's where you get necessary goods and products that you need. And also we are told that the issue of food price is now becoming a problem, and fuel shortage also. Now, I don't think what he is saying is actually the reality. And on the other hand, remember that request by the leader of the opposition, Venancio Mondlane, that people, they must stop their protests, but protests must resume on Monday. And therefore, we don't know on Monday what's going to happen. So I think the intervention response from people I spoke to, particularly in the opposition, they're saying that's exactly what they wanted. When you listen to Mondlane, he gave an interview to CNN in a Portuguese language, and he pointed out that he wants either EU, South Africa, US, or Portugal to assist, and therefore that's the view that South Africa can be accepted as a mediator or facilitator. But as I pointed out, the president of that country, the outgoing president, is saying there is no need and everything is under control.
And so if you just give us a sense about the, reaction just across various stakeholders, what has it been, particularly when you look at SADC, as well as, of course, as here domestically in South Africa, the various political parties have also had a lot to say, including the PAP Southern Caucus calling for some form of mediation. Just talk to us about the general reaction, both locally here on the continent and also internationally.
Well, we saw the AU Commission Chair issuing a statement calling for dialogue and calling for calm and indicating that the destruction of property and infrastructure must stop. The same call was made by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. And I think tomorrow there's a message of the SG in relation to the coming year. I think in his message, he is going to also touch on issues related to security, political instability around the world, and I don't think he will leave Mozambique. And therefore, there's been that response. The political parties in South Africa, yes, they've issued statements, but there's nothing that they can do, because remember, this is an independent country. When you shout from a position of privilege, you can say whatever you want to say, because it's not your responsibility to ensure that this issue is addressed based on your position. And therefore, it's easy for them to make any statements and many calls. But what we must remember is that this is an independent country. And as I indicated, the current outgoing president is saying There's no need. Everything is under control. They'll be able to manage the situation. Therefore, South Africa will have to be careful in terms of how they handle this. This whole notion of people saying quiet diplomacy, that and that, I mean, gone are those days where South Africa was a bully on the continent, like it used to during apartheid, sending military and capability, including men and women, to go and fight in foreign countries. You can't do that. It can't be done. And therefore, South Africa can only persuade and only engage in diplomatic channels. There's no way. We know that at no point since 1994, any sitting head of state, be it Nelson Mandela, Thabo Mbeki, Jacob Zuma, took that decision to just deploy the military in a foreign country. And therefore, you just have to find a way to engage stakeholders.
And I mean, granted, and I hear what you're saying, Sophie, in terms of just that diplomatic approach that South Africa has to take. But just looking at the gravity of the situation, particularly when you look at what it has done from a political and security instability in the region, just the effects of what's happening in Mozambique directly on South Africa. We've seen, of course, how this has impacted on the economy of both countries. Just on that note, just in terms of the severity of what's happening in Mozambique is to South Africa, particularly on an economic scale.
You are correct. Some years back, under the leadership of Thabo Mbeki, South Africa launched what we know as the Maputo Corridor. Yeah. The intention was to use that corridor for trade and investment with the continent. But secondly, South Africa has invested a lot of resource in the gas sector in that country, and we get lots of that from Mozambique, including the issues related to use of ports in Mozambique. I don't even want to talk about tourism. Many South Africans this time around, they visit Mozambique because it is our neighbor, next door neighbor. Trade and investment, it's quite huge, and it's skewed in favor of South Africa. We know all our neighboring countries, trade is skewed in favor of South Africa, whether I talk Zimbabwe, Botswana, and all of that. And one of our neighboring countries, when there's some instability, that will affect trade and investment, as we saw with the trucks that are supposed to go through that route or corridor. Some of them going as far as East Africa with the commodities. And therefore, it doesn't only affect us, but it will affect other countries as well. For example, a country like the DRC, when they are supposed to send their commodities or their minerals to the ports in South Africa and sell them abroad. So it is a serious concern in terms of trade and investment, and those who are near the border are already feeling it.
Absolutely. And already we're hearing stories of people crossing to other nearby borders, to other countries as well, fleeing that potential violence that will or might escalate come Monday. Thank you so much, Sophie, for that. Of course, that's SABC News International editor Sophie Mokoena there for us.